After 14 long years, gamers are finally given another addition to our favorite war-torn galaxy of Warhammer 40k. We transition from snazzy green orcs to the endless cloud of biomass known as the Tyranids. Welcome to today's episode of Simply Honest, the show where we give you an honest yet simple first impression of the latest games with a little bit of gameplay sprinkled in. I'm your host, Nico Silverado, and today we are tackling Space Marines 2. Now, to give a little bit of context about myself in terms of my experience with the 40k universe, I would consider myself to be a interested individual. I am by no means a lore master. I do not know everything about all the factions, as the factions themselves are extremely complex and ever expanding. But I do consider myself to be decently informed to be able to appreciate and enjoy all the characters, the planets, and the references that the game chooses to create as you play through the series. As a longtime fan of the 40k universe, I was very pleased to hear the release of another Space Marines game. I was especially excited about the story continuing off after the events of the first game, knowing fully well that the industry standard has increased and the technology has also allowed games to be much more complex. I did hold the final product of this game to be at a fair higher standard than some of the other games that I reviewed in the past. Now, before I went and dove into the game itself, I had a major expectation in regards to what the game did in terms of the design and in terms of the art that was put into the game itself. Warhammer 40k has a very well-established form of fan bases for the art, the lore, and everything else in general. And when I dove into the game, one of the biggest things that I was keeping an eye on was whether or not I felt that the game maintained the source material. And throughout my entire playthrough, both in the PvP, PvE, I did find that this game, thankfully, attached itself to the source material and kept everything in line that allows for the more veteran players and the more veteran lore masters to be very, hopefully, thankful and appreciative that the game stuck true to its guns. We were able to mostly focus on aspects such as the PvE styles in both the campaign and in the multiplayer, but for me, the overall gameplay feel and the style of PvE was very fun during the initial jump in. The devs had recently released a patch that allowed for much needed balancing for the players in order to make the game more rewarding, but also without losing the initial challenge. I personally found that after leveling 2 of the characters in the multiplayer PvE game mode, I found that the majority of my excitement and steam for wanting to keep playing in the PvE mode did kind of taper off and go in a downhill direction. Of course, this is at the situation and the time of this recording, it comes down to the problem of that there is not enough content to inspire a lot of long-term gameplay unless you were to get more involved with other friends or to have a more goal-driven style gameplay agenda. Now, during my time throughout the entirety of the campaign, I was able to play through the campaign twice. One time playing it with reckless abandon in order to just appreciate the story in its entirety, and a secondary time playing the game on one of the higher difficulties while taking a more closer look at some of the various aspects of it. Now, something that led to some degree of negative posts and press within fellow gamers and myself was that the game did not really have a means to give a Reader's Digest version of the 40k lore. Sadly, this would fall to the player to do a lot of outside research in order to understand the various topics that the game has. But this is also not entirely the studio's fault, as in my personal experience and in all honesty, the sheer scope of the 40k universe is rather too large to just give a simple 2-minute synopsis about what 40k is, because that question itself is rather hard to answer depending on what perspective you wish to view it from. The campaign, I would say, could be categorized as a relatively shortish campaign, as I was personally able to get through the campaign in around, give or take, 10 hours, taking objectives rather casually, but also taking the time to every so often get lost in the game and in just really the environment itself. However, the game has a very nice action-packed story with various points within the game that gave me a fair amount of surprise and excitement, as I was able to fight various forms of larger tier bosses, large encounters, and allowing me to really get into the action and intensity of the combat of the campaign. Having played the game on its max difficulty. I felt that the game did offer a high skill ceiling, as the game constantly makes you move around various dodges and parries and requires you to be very much aware of everything that's happening around you, as the game does have a very high amount of ad density, both in the PvP and PvE aspects of the game. While playing through the game itself, you're given a form of power fantasy as you are playing as a genetically modified super soldier, towards enemies falling with each swing of your power sword and unleashing an absolute chaotic amount of destruction as you're fighting literal waves of enemies. This game seems to highlight its commitment to the dark action genre, allowing not only the fans of the series to commit to the overall genre that they've always fallen in love with, but also providing a large amount of enjoyment for newer players who may not be too familiar with the series itself. Now, I will say that the game does what it can to provide a moderately simplified manner to provide new players an understanding of the various terminologies and words that are within the 40k universe itself, allowing them to be moderately involved while still being decently informed about what is happening within the story in order to add relevance and significance to certain actions. Now, in my personal opinion, in regards to the overall future of Space Marines 2, I do believe that Space Marines 2 has an ability to remain active for quite a long time within the game community, with everything from the various PvE operations, the PvP, and the overall niche market that they have chosen to appeal to. 40k fans amongst various other gaming fans are exceptionally loyal, especially in terms of the content that they apply, allowing their games to surpass many other AAA titles for years and years. One thing I will say that is a interesting development for me is seeing how the current roadmap has allowed for them to really try to give players what they want in terms of new and exciting content. The year 2025 roadmap that they had released during the time of this recording does show promise to give players some excitement, allowing them to come back to Space Marines 2 once new changes and additions have been created. I'm very curious to see where and how Space Marines 2 develops over the course of the next year. Before we officially end here, I want to give some of my final thoughts in regards to what I believe Space Marines is, what it can be, and what I think you as potential players or reviewers could really benefit from. In my honest opinion, Space Marines 2 is a game that is built towards a very large and very well-established fan base. While many new fans of the series are going to be jumping into a very dynamic and action-packed experience into 40k, they need to understand that this game may run the risk of proving to become very confusing, overwhelming with information, and you may not quite honestly understand what's going on within the series or why certain scenes have such great significance. The series as a whole, compared to the first game, has evolved quite nicely in all aspects, both in quality of game, graphics, and in my personal opinion, some of the voice acting and some of the dynamic interactions that you have with the characters. I personally would like to say though that I hope that Space Marines 2 as a game is able to grow in size for its community, and I hope that in the future, after this recording is done, they're able to interact with more different types of missions, incorporate more species, and to really keep the hype of the series and 40k growing from the gaming aspect in this case. As the second installment to the series, as I said earlier, it has all around grown very well. They've used a lot of the new forms of technology. They've created a lot of really good points, and one of the biggest things I will commend Games Workshop is that they have stuck to their formula. They have stuck to what they have made in terms of source material, and I think that's something that very few AAA studios are willing to do sometimes, as a lot of times many studios tend to retcon themselves to the ground in order to fit this weird formula that we have been seeing in 2024 in terms of having games suddenly overnight canonize events that never existed in established content. As always though, feel free to drop a comment and tell us how you feel about today's review. Like and subscribe and check out some of our upcoming videos that you might see in the description as well as in the end of the video. And if you have a game that you think we should do a review on, let me know down in the comments. But I am your host, Nico Silverado. This has been Simply Honest, and we'll see you all on the next video.